Good Monday morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us from the digital news desk on this Monday morning as we are taking a live look at our DOT cameras courtesy of 511. This is at I-41 north and southbound. You can see traffic flowing well again there. This is near County Highway U in the Wrightstown area. There was a backup there maybe 10 minutes ago. Tammy, it was bumper-to-bumper traffic just 10 minutes ago. So great to see that traffic is flowing once again. We did get a report of a crash earlier this morning. We are working to get some details on that, and we'll continue to update you. But again, traffic is flowing well on your Monday morning. That is what we like to see, and great to have you all joining us here at the Digital News Desk again as we check in on Mondays, getting ready to start the work week, and starting with a update on your report, Tammy, that you had on Friday, which is a interesting kind of scam, to say the least. It's a brushing scam, and I did not know about this until, and I was gone on Friday, so I didn't know about this until about 20 minutes ago when you gave me a list of questions. But it's kind of fascinating that this is taking place, but what someone thinks might be an awesome, hey, I just got some free gifts
stuff, right?
Not as good as what maybe they're hoping.
Not necessarily, right. And it's a brushing scam, and both the Better Business Bureau and USPS postal inspectors are kind of putting out this ahead of the holidays. I mean, people get a lot of packages, right? They're ordering and maybe doing your holiday shopping online, and these are free things. These are things you didn't order that are showing up at your doorstep. And you might say, well, what's in it? Why would somebody send this to a person? So the brushing, why it's called brushing, is it's to brush up their reviews. So, you know, a lot of people look on, like Amazon, for example, you're looking at reviews, you're looking at sales, right? You're more likely to buy from a seller who's selling more. The reviews look good. So this is where the Better Business Bureau says these are typically like foreign third-party sellers who are sending things, and they're showing up on people's doorsteps. And this is not something new, but it's been happening more often. And first of all, it's illegal to do this.
That's important to mention.
Yes.
Some people might be thinking,
legal.
Good for them sending out gifts, but no, they shouldn't be doing this.
And Amazon, I mean, fake reviews. This is not by a real person who bought the product. So that's not, Amazon doesn't accept that either. So. But on the backside of this, it is okay for you to keep the things that you're getting. And I did ask the Better Business Bureau, I said, so what kind of things are people sending, you know, what are receiving? I mean, and I read a bunch of their reviews and kind of just filed complaints on Scam Tracker saying, you know, I got some plastic thing. I don't even know what it is.
Just
some random thing.
Piece of plastic, yep.
They said usually it's something that is pretty lightweight, they can send inexpensive, and just, you know, but it shows that they actually, you know, sent something, made a sale. In other cases, you know, people are getting clothing or even some small electronics, flashlights, hand warmers. I mean, just some
odd things.
Not
getting a new air fryer that's on the Christmas list.
Not
probably.
always, but that's what's happening. So the thing is, they want you to report these. So if it's Amazon, let them know. And also, if you have an account, keep an eye on your account to make sure, they probably have your address, might even have your phone number. And that's another thing. USPS says if you're getting any follow-up phone calls or any kind of communication telling you that you have to pay for these things that you didn't order, you do not have to. And let Amazon know, or the seller. And sometimes there's not even a return address on these packages. So that's what I was reading a lot of the reports.
So you have no clue
they were just
where
saying
it came from.
They don't know where
it
it came from. So,
interesting.
But there are a lot of reports out there about this, and just kind of an odd thing, but just so you know, and you're, keeping you up to date on this.
Especially with the holiday season right here. That's an important thing to be alert for and be watching out for. So, interesting. Always
something
fascinating.
New, right?
Consumer first alerts. We appreciate that. Something else that is going to be fascinating this week is that weather forecast. We're going to bring Steve in here as well, because sunny to start the week, at least today, Steve, but that's going to blow out of here pretty quickly. And I use the word blow for a reason, because it is going to be windy overnight, and then some more late fall-like weather really starting to roll in here.
Yeah, it's going to be really, in the first half of this work week, wet and windy. And in the second half of the work week, it is going to be more typical November cold, because it's been pretty mild for the most part this autumn, and today is going to be no exception because we'll get our highs in the 50s. But once this weather maker comes on through, our temperatures will start to come back down to earth. All right, I see Emerson is piloting things. There you go. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. Go ahead and hit the cut button, and there you see that's all Emerson Lehman. He's just in control of everything there. Thank you, buddy. There's a live view from our Green Bay sky cam. We got some blue skies, but I also see some clouds to the southwest. Temperature is 35, and with calm air, that's what it feels like out there. We'll be up to 45 at 10 o'clock. On the way to a high of 54 around 1 o'clock this afternoon. Increasing clouds. Rain comes up from the south around sunset, and tonight it's going to be a soggy one. And this is our next weather maker. 3 things to watch for. Widespread soaking rain tonight. And then tomorrow morning, strong southeast winds. They'll be very gusty. And then the third thing is the colder air returning through the midweek. So there's the storm system that we're tracking. Low pressure in the Texas Panhandle moving into Oklahoma. It's driving rain into the Corn Belt. It's now raining in central Iowa, central Illinois. You see where it's going. It's heading to the north. Eventually, we're going to need to pop open our umbrellas. So here's First Alert Pinpoint Predictor. And over the next few hours, that sunshine is going to gradually fade. Partly sunny, 1 o'clock this afternoon. There's the rain getting into Green Bay around 5 p.m. And for folks farther south, Fox Cities, Fond du Lac, Sheboygan, that rain is probably going to be arriving closer to 3:30, 4 o'clock. So probably after-school activities could be a bit wet, so parents keep that in mind. The rain spreads north and east through the evening hours. Widespread moderate rain by 9 p.m. The heaviest rain around and after midnight. That's where you see the yellows and the oranges on Pinpoint Predictor. Do not be surprised that there's a couple claps of thunder overnight. Showers still around on Tuesday, mainly in the morning, with a lesser chance in the afternoon as most of the rain pushes into upper Michigan and out of our hair. Rainfall totals on First Alert Pinpoint Predictor, pretty close to an inch for the Green Bay area, a little bit more to the west across central Wisconsin. That 1.92 there in Wautoma might be a little overdone, but I think you have the general gist. This is the potential for a good widespread soaking, which only helps out with next year's growing season. Obviously, we're not growing anything outside now. It's too cold, but you still want to get some moisture every now and then and recharge up that water table, so that's only going to help in the future. The wind is going to be very strong when you wake up tomorrow morning. This is 5 a.m., early Tuesday, so people have their alarm clocks going off, and they'll be hitting their buttons on their clock, and they'll be hearing woo at the window. Southeast winds will be gusting around at above 40 miles an hour. Now, if you're driving to work tomorrow or bringing the kids into school, just be really careful on those bridges and overpasses. When you get the elevated roadway, and if you have a high-profile vehicle, that wind can really push your car or your truck, into an adjacent lane if you're not really paying attention, have a good grip of that steering wheel. The wind is going to slow down a little bit in the afternoon and evening and turn to the west around the backside of that low-pressure system. So your severe weather outlook for Tuesday is low, but I put the upgrade sticker in there because we might have to bump that to the moderate category. I mean, we're going to be looking through the latest data on First Alert Pinpoint Predictor and some other computer models, and if the winds project to be any higher than what we're showing you, then we'll have to elevate that into the moderate category. And if we do, then all of a sudden Tuesday becomes a First Alert weather day. So we will watch it very closely. We'll sift the latest information, and we'll keep you in the know what's going on. So there's your First Alert Super 7-day forecast. 54 today, 59 tomorrow, and then behind the storm system, seasonably cold air, highs in the lower half of the 40s. I think Tammy noticed this on Thursday, showers and some wet snowflakes. Okay, yes, there might be some snow flying around Thursday morning. At this point, I'm not saying it's going to stick and accumulate. There's still some question marks there, but it's something that bears some watching. Saturday, the start of the Wisconsin gun deer hunting season. Our forecast for this hasn't changed a whole lot since we first alerted you last week. Still looks like temperatures around dawn near the freezing mark, wind chills in the 20s. Skies will be mostly cloudy. And the forecast looks kind of similar for the Packers-49ers game on Sunday. 3:25 kickoff at Lambeau Field. Cloudy, cold, and calm. Temperatures will be in the upper half of the 30s. And one more little nugget of knowledge for you. We've got state championship high school football games later this week. Good luck to all 3 of our local teams that are going to be playing. Thursday, 4 p.m., Stratford versus Wrightstown. Go Tigers. 40 degrees. Blustery northwest winds, cloudy skies. Friday, 10 a.m., Catholic Memorial versus Notre Dame. Go Tritons. We got 38. And northwest breeze and mostly cloudy skies. And the Bayport Pirates against Muskego Friday afternoon, 4 p.m. Similar to the Notre Dame forecast, upper 30s, a brisk northwest wind, and mostly cloudy skies. So you get the feeling that, once this storm system comes on through, we're kind of taking another step closer to some winter-like weather with some more normal temperatures and also some wet snowflakes possibly mixing in with some raindrops on Thursday.
Those hunters are going to be wishing that they had the snowy flake, Steve, on Saturday morning for gun deer season. It always makes it a little bit easier to track if they're able to harvest a deer, but nice to at least know that they're not going to be sweating out there in the deer stands as well.
Yeah, and the thing is that as it gets colder, it gets the deer moving around too, and that is helpful. It's not fun when the deer aren't moving and they're secluded and there's nothing to aim at. But with the colder weather, that should hopefully get them moving around, and we're hoping that it's a successful season, and we're hoping Mother Nature can help out a little bit.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks so much. We'll let you get ready for your show coming up at 9 o'clock. We'll wish you all a wonderful rest of your Monday as we take a live look at Manitowoc this morning, and make sure to stay with us on air and online for updates throughout the day. Make it a great week, everybody.
Devin Lemahue. Appearances, please. All right. So, good morning. I have on here, I think it's opposite. I think you're going to kick it off with 25 minutes of argument, followed by 30 minutes, and then 5 minutes in rebuttal. Is that correct? Perfect. All right, with that, let's get started.
Thank you, Your Honor. Every 4 years, the Wisconsin Election Commission must appoint an administrator for the Senate's consideration. But here, 3 commissioners have decided that they will not send any administrative appointment to the Senate for as long as they wish, effectively keeping the administrator in her position.
Is that in the record? I didn't read anywhere in the record where it said that there were 3 administrators who would not ever appoint a new administrator.
Well,
in this one instance they didn't, but can you point me where it says that?
In Appendix 48, which is R21 at 17, Commissioner Thompson, one of the abstaining commissioners, said that WEC would not send any appointment over unless legislature, quote, promised to confirm, and that, quote, without such a promise, WEC should not even play this game. I think that sentiment was echoed by Commissioner Jacobs as well. I grant that the 3rd commissioner did not say that, but I think it's fair from at least 2 of the 3 to surmise that their position is that they will never send an administrator over to the Senate unless the Senate promises to confirm them, which is, of course, not the purpose and design of advice and consent, to say we're not going to do it unless you pre-commit to rubber stamping what we're doing.
So, Counsel, I guess my question for you is, didn't the legislature just come before the Supreme Court a few years ago and ask the court and argue that the expiration of a term virtually means nothing? How come you're back here now asking us to say that this time the expiration of a term actually means something? What's the difference?
Your Honor, in praying what the legislative position was that until a replacement has been confirmed, the existing office holder is a lawful holdover. We agree that Administrator Wolf is the lawful holdover currently. She can continue to exercise all the authorities of the administrator. This case raises a different question, which is under this particular statute, 1561(1)(b)(1), whether the commission has to send over a confirmation for the Senate's consideration, which was not an issue at play in Prane.
Are you asking us to overrule Prane?
Absolutely not, Your Honor. In fact, one of the claims that my friends brought in this case was to get the circuit court to rule that Administrator Wolf is currently a lawful holdover. We conceded to that point. We did not dispute it, so we certainly do not contest that aspect of the case. The issue is, she's a holdover. How do we get to the point where there is not a holdover, but a confirmed individual? And what the statute provides, and it's important to look at the statutory text, it has 2 features that I think settle the statutory question here. And this is the first sentence of 1561(1)(b)(1). First, it says that the administrator shall be appointed by a majority of the commission for the advice and consent of the Senate. The word shall is, of course, mandatory. But second, and also importantly, it makes clear that appointment lasts for 4 years, expiring on the 1st of July, the odd number year.
In Prane, it said 6 years.
Sorry, Your Honor?
In Prane, it said 6 years.
Yes, Your Honor, and we do not dispute that Administrator Wolf is currently the lawful holdover. If in Prane, the governor had in fact discharged his duty to nominate somebody to replace Praying. Now, that person had not, at least at the point of the Praying case, met with the approval of the Senate, and then you had a standoff between the governor, elected chief executive officer of Wisconsin, and the Senate. Here, they have the WEC, or the three commissioners of the WEC, have not done the job that the governor had done in Praying by nominating anybody. And our point is they just have to nominate. If they nominate, and
let's look at that language. I don't see shall nominate, but okay, the language says shall be appointed by a majority of the members of the commission with the advice and consent of the Senate, and then it says how long the term is, to a 4-year term. Yes. So you're trying to argue to us today that shall imposes an affirmative duty to do something by a certain time.
I think that is the best reading of the statutory text.
So let's talk about, and you get that from shall. So let's talk about some other situations. So when we have a constitutional provision in the U.S. Constitution, for example, that says the president shall be at least 35 years of age. So is that an affirmative duty of some kind? And if so, who has that duty?
Your Honor, not every use of the word shall in every context proposes an affirmative duty. In that context, that provides the age minimum that the president has to be in order to serve as president. That's not an action-forcing situation.
Okay, and so let's look at a different one. The Supreme Court shall have 7 members who shall be known as justices of the Supreme Court. This is the Wisconsin Constitution. So is that a duty on someone to make sure there's always 7? And if there's not, are we not a Supreme Court?
No, Your Honor. I think that is similar, or maybe perhaps identical to the 35-year provision that you read for the U.S. Constitution, which is that establishes the mandatory rule for the body.
Okay, and I heard you say just before then that somehow shall is to nominate, but it doesn't say that, correct?
Your Honor, that's right. They were saying the actual term is shall be appointed by a majority of members of the commission with the advice and consent of the Senate.
Okay,
and they
so does the Senate have a duty then? Because they shall be nominated with the advice and consent of the Senate. So are you saying that the Senate would have to also participate in the process?
Has to participate in the process of giving advice and consent.
Okay, so like in Preen, when they didn't even hold a vote on it, so they would have to hold a vote on it? Is that what you're saying?
My understanding, obviously this wasn't briefed in this case, my understanding of the original public meaning of the concept of advice and consent is that it allows the body, the Senate usually, whether it's the United States Senate or here, to establish the procedures by which it will provide that advice and consent. The amount of time that the Senate takes to act on that, the internal procedures that the Senate decides to do that, I think that would be a non-justiciable issue that is committed entirely to the constitutional body of the Senate.
So they wouldn't have to bring it for advice and consent. So you think this statute just gives, shall be appointed when it's describing the WEC administrator is only applies to the commission?
Well, the Senate has to discharge advice and consent. If Your Honor is saying that if the Senate doesn't discharge its advice and consent constitutionally, if it takes a certain amount of time, that can be litigated in another case. You know, I'm pretty sure I would be arguing here that whether that was a certain amount of delay was constitutional or not is an issue that is committed entirely to the Senate's discretion, but the court could decide differently. But here we haven't had an argument like that. So here the question is, can 3 commissioners essentially cut the Senate out entirely forever of the decision?
Under your reason, the way I'm hearing you when you're talking to Justice Dallett and speaking about the Senate, it says the Elections Commission shall be under the direction and supervision of an administrator who shall be appointed by a majority of the members of the commission with advice and consent of the Senate to serve for a 4-year term expiring on July 1st of the odd number years. Are you also saying then that 4-year term shall be served out so that whoever is appointed the commissioner must serve for 4 years? Because that is the only way to logically read this sentence the way you are telling us to.
Well, the other issue of how a vacancy can be created is addressed by the subsequent sentences.
No. I'm talking about how you are using the word shall in this sentence. You are saying that shall means that the majority of the commissioners must appoint a majority of the must appoint the administrator. You're saying that shall means that the Senate has this advice and consent that they must exercise. So then why wouldn't it go to the third phrase in that sentence, which says that the commissioner shall serve for a 4-year term? That they have to, no matter what happens, they got to serve 4 years.
Because there's other provisions both in 1561 1B1 and also in other places of the Wisconsin Code that provide that vacancies can be created in certain ways. And because those are provided in certain ways, obviously the individual can resign. They could take another office where they can't serve they can't serve in this position. They could pass away. So certainly that sentence, when you're talking about other issues, could not be looked at in isolation.
Aren't you really just asking, you're really asking us to read this sentence to give some kind of deadline by which the governor has to do this? Because I don't think anyone here would disagree that it's the governor that it's the commission. No one here would disagree that the commission is the one who makes the appointment. That's not up for grabs here. You're you're reading to us of this word shall in this sentence is to somehow tie it to a duty. And as I talked about earlier, shall doesn't necessarily impose an affirmative duty. I think you actually agreed that it doesn't always do that. But you're also saying it's a duty by a certain time. Because even if the commission has to do it, you're saying they have to do it at the end of the term. Because they did do it here. They did do it because that's how she got where she is.
Our position is not that they would have to appoint on like July 1st or June 30th or July 2nd. It's that just like I think they have a footnote right at the end of their brief that said even under a position, they should have a reason. The WEC commissioner should have a reasonable time to do it. And if your honors hold that there is a mandatory duty, and we're not going to exactly say where the line is, maybe a week, maybe a month. It's now been a year and a half.
But why does it matter? I mean, why does it matter? Where do you get that there's a duty to do it by a certain time? Where does that sentence say that?
Certainly, our argument is that if you pair the mandatory language of shall with the time frame for how long the office lasts, by far the most reasonable reading of that text is when that term expires, that's when that mandatory duty is performed. And by the way, I know we've had a lot of discussion here about hypotheticals and the use of shall. I don't read my friend's brief to dispute that if a sentence used the active voice rather than the passive voice, that rather than saying shall be appointed by the commission, if the sentence was rather said the commissioners shall appoint.
Well, it certainly is clearer in the third sentence where it says if a vacancy occurs in the administrator position, the commission shall appoint a new administrator and submit the appointment for Senate confirmation no later than 45 days after the date of the vacancy. I can't imagine having a case over that sentence because that is crystal clear.
Well, certainly under the different understandings of shall and other hypotheticals that I've had mentioned earlier, that potentially wouldn't settle those hypotheticals. My point here is that the use of the active voice in that later sentence versus the passive voice in the first sentence doesn't make a meaningful difference. Brian Gardner, who I think is seen as the lead grammarian in the United States with regard to statutory interpretation, has said that, and we say this in the brief, that all the use of the passive voice does is focus the mind of the reader on the thing acted upon, here the appointment of the administrator. So the only difference between the first sentence and the third sentence is the use of the passive voice.
No, what about the use of the word if? If a vacancy occurs.
Right, or 45 days.
Right, if, then, and no, what about the no later than 45 days after the vacancy? That seems to impose a mandatory duty. Well, that doesn't say that in the first sentence.
And we're not arguing that the WEC had to act within 45 days. We're saying there's a mandatory duty in the word shall, and they had to do it within a reasonable time.
Okay, so you're saying reasonable time, and you're saying, what, they had to nominate? What if they don't agree? What if they're 3 and 3? Like, what are you saying that their duty was here?
Well, so certainly it happens sometimes in state government that a public official or body doesn't do a mandatory duty. Mandamus is the statutory tool to force that. If WEC couldn't come to wouldn't refuse to do its mandatory duty, a tool, which is the one we used here, of mandamus, is the way that you solve that function.
And why do you think it's a plain duty?
because of the statutory text. Obviously we have a disagreement here about the statutory text, but if the court agrees with us that we are correct in the statutory text, the plain duty comes from the statutory text.
Counsel, 2 years ago, 3 of my colleagues dissented from the Prane decision. They said the majority's absurd holding allows Prane's 6-year term on the Board of Natural Resources, which expired over a year ago, to last for as long as Prane wants it to, so long as he refuses to leave and the Senate doesn't confirm a nominated successor. Why haven't you asked us to adopt the dissent in that case, because that would get you the outcome you're seeking, right? I go back to the dissent again. It said the majority bases these nonsensical conclusions on its misguided reading of a handful of statutes and a common law doctrine de facto de jure appointments.
Well, Your Honor, we certainly agree with the majority decision in Prane, but what is happening here is far more absurd, to borrow the term, that was going on there. There we had a constitutional standoff between the governor.
Far more absurd assumes the fact that the first is absurd.
Well,
you don't mean it that
well,
way.
Whatever level of absurdity one wants to put on the Prane situation, whether it's 0 or 100, this one is orders of magnitude more. There you had a traditional constitutional standoff between the governor and the Senate. They didn't agree with the appointment. That's resolved in the holdover. Here we have 3 essentially bureaucrats who have no constitutional status holding the chief election officer appointment hostage away from the people. This is night and day from Prane. And these folks are saying that they're not going to send it over unless the constitutional body pre-commits to confirming their pick.
Did you just say that she's being held hostage?
The nomination.
The nomination,
is
not
being
the
held,
nominee.
is being held hostage away from the and they're saying and I know that they're given the terms to release the hostage. You Senate pre-commit to confirm our choice, or we're not playing your game, and the game being advice and consent.
Let's talk about the game. I mean, you are trying to thread a needle here that has no eye. 6 of the 7 of us sat in this courtroom 2 years ago when your client insisted that Fred Prane should be able to retain his position on the DNR board even though his 6-year term had expired, and your client won. This is a case of careful what you wish for, isn't it? And now the legislature is here 2 years later demanding that Megan Wolf must vacate her position. It seems to me this has little to do with what the law actually says and far more to do with who is in these positions. If the legislature favors someone, they stay. If they don't, they must go. Does that sound like the rule of law to you?
If Megan Wolf was nominated, was appointed by the commission and sent over to the Senate, and the Senate acted the same way they did with Prane, which is not hold hearings, then Megan Wolf would stay as a holdover exactly like Prane did. We are asking for the same rule for Megan Wolf as Prane, and I would hate it if it was the opposite, that 3 members of WEC could essentially keep this appointment away from the people's representatives.
I think it's just the opposite. Don't you think it's a little fishy that the 3 Republican members of the commission, those 3 commissioners, voted to approve her and appoint her to send it to the Republican legislature, which is obviously going to debunk her? Doesn't it seem a little strange?
I don't think it's strange for commissioners who approve of a job that the administrator is doing and want her to continue in that job will follow their statutory and constitutional responsibility to say, this is the person we want as the administrator of WEC. What is fishy, and not actually fishy because you don't have to guess what they were up to, is that the 3...
Well, you can kind of tell what they were up to. It's pretty obvious.
And it's also obvious what the Democratic commissioners were up to too, right?
It's clearly what the Democrat commissioners
if we
are up to.
follow that logic.
I think, Justice Porter-Sewicz, if you look at the public statements of the Republican commissioners that voted for Administrator
Well, I looked
Wolf...
at some of the public statements of your clients, which seem to contradict the admissions that you made to the complaint of WBAY and Ms. Wolf.
Well, Your Honor, may I just finish responding to your first
You
point?
may.
If you look at the public comments that were made by the Republican WBAY commissioners that voted for Administrator Wolf, they were expressing confidence in her actions. They were recommending that she be, in fact, approved by the Senate.
Is this in the record?
I believe it was in the public, judicially noticeable record of the official proceedings of WEC. Now, certainly, we put the statements of Mark Thompson, and that's in the appendix. The other statements, they're available in the public record in this court.
I think my colleagues are being a little unfair because they're asking you questions, you're responding, and then they're challenging, well, is that in the record? But the bottom line is that whatever the political strategies are of the commissioners, if there are any, is really irrelevant to the statutory interpretation that we are tasked with in this case. Is that right, counsel?
That's right, Your Honor. Although I will say that sometimes, we get into these separation of powers arguments before your court, and and parties put before you hypotheticals like this strategy could be used in this way that would really break the separation of powers. And sometimes you get pushback, well, that's kind of hypothetical. But this wolf comes as a wolf. Commissioner Thompson said, we are not going to send anybody over unless the Senate pre-commits to approving them.
Counsel,
That breaks the entire system. That is claiming, frankly, to use your term, an absurd loophole that essentially keeps the people's representatives from ever having a voice, at least after the first vote 4 years before, of who's going to serve as the chief election officer of the state.
Counsel, I wanted to just make sure I understand what you're arguing and what you're not. Some of your briefing talks about separation of powers. I took that to mean a reference to the statute, not a constitutional argument. At least by the reply brief, I think it was clear to me that you were not making, and I didn't see any fully developed constitutional separation of powers argument. That what I understood you to be arguing was really directing our attention to the statutory language and what it requires. And I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something with your argument. Is that correct?
It's true that we're not making a standalone, non-statutory constitutional argument. Of course, the statute was enacted under the constitutional authority of the legislature.
Yeah. Maybe another way to say it is just to make sure I understand. If this court disagreed with your interpretation of the statute, there isn't an alternative argument you're making to sustain your position. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor, because if the statute means what my friends on the other side mean, that means the legislature is exercising its constitutional authority to create this,
right,
frankly, absurd loophole where 3 commissioners can hold a nomination hostage for as long as they want. We think that's not clearly not what the legislature intended by the plain statutory text and the context. And what we have here today is the greatest illustration of how the legislature couldn't have possibly intended that.
30. Go ahead. Thank you. Of course. Counsel, in your briefing, but I point to the reply brief, you indicate that really whether or not there's a vacancy is irrelevant. Is that correct? Am I misstating that? Let me read what I think says that. And I'm looking at page 5, the heading in your reply brief. Well, let me ask, regardless of what it says in your reply brief, do you think whether or not there's a vacancy is not essential to argument?
Well, there's no dispute that there is no vacancy. So it's not that it's not essential. It's just that there's no dispute. There's no vacancy. She's a holdover until this is resolved.
Let me get to then the wording, which is on page 5 in your reply brief, the heading, which is subsection. Are you there yet? I don't want to go ahead of you. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Good. Subsection 15.61(1)(b)(1) requires WEC to appoint an administrator at the expiration of each 4-year term, even without a vacancy. And then on page 6, you state, shall, at the top of the page, that
15.61(1)(b)(1), quote, shall be appointed, quote, language itself confers appointment power upon WEC with no requirement of a vacancy. So
That's
I
right.
took that to mean that your argument is based on the first sentence of the text of that statute, regardless if there's a vacancy. Am I missing something?
That's correct, and I mean, it will usually arise when there is no vacancy. I mean, this third, fourth, and fifth sentences of that section explain what happens when there isn't vacancy. This is a more mundane scenario where the administrator serves out her full 4-year term, and then WEC needs to reappoint her to serve out another 4-year term, or appoint somebody else for the advice and consent of the Senate.
Just to tie it up, the shall be appointed language, your argument is, by its very text, confers appointment power upon WEC, and there is no requirement of a vacancy. In other words, it could be non-vacant.
That's right, and I don't think take my friends to disagree with that position.
Just to follow up on that, 3 of the commissioners, though, did. I mean, the 3 commissioners who abstained seemed to indicate that they could not, they argued they could not vote to appoint Ms. Wolf because they didn't have power because there was no vacancy. And I think you're saying both parties disagree with that. Is that correct?
I don't think that they were saying that they didn't have the power to. In fact, Commissioner Thompson said clearly that if the Senate had pre-committed to confirming Ms. Administrator Wolf, he would have voted to reappoint her, and I think the rest of them would have too. And that is, I think, what's really good. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt this what was going on here is the 3 commissioners who voted to abstain strongly support her staying on, and they won't vote for her unless the Senate essentially abdicates its role by pre-committing to confirm her.
Thank you.
Definitely not that way. Madam Chief Justice, and may it please the court, this is a holdover case, and appellants have conceded 2 of the core issues in this case already, that Megan Wolf is validly holding over as the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and that during that holdover, there is no vacancy for the commission to fill. The commission brought this suit after the Senate majority voted to deem her renominated and then voted to fire her. But in the litigation, appellants have quickly conceded those 2 points. And although their public comments, as Justice Protasewicz referred to, have sometimes contradicted those litigation positions, they've never disputed in this case that she's validly holding over and that there's no vacancy in the position while she does so. Now let's move to the appellant's remaining argument that despite the holdover and despite the lack of vacancy, the commission has a duty, and a mandatory one at that, to reappoint her or to select someone new. That's wrong for 2 basic reasons: the plain language of 1561 itself and this court's decision in Pasco v. City of Milwaukee. So 1561 is a big statute that discusses appointments, removals, and vacancies, both for members of the Wisconsin Elections Commission itself and for the administrator. Justice
Counsel, I
Hageman?
just want to follow up on the question I asked your opposing counsel, but I'm looking at the record here, and I want to make sure I'm understanding it, but in at least the appendix here, I think this was the maybe complaint, but Commissioner Thompson, Mark Thompson, agreed and concluded the commission lacked even the ability under the current law to reappoint because there is no vacancy in the administrator position. So I thought, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, that the 3 Democratic appointees, or at least Commissioner Thompson, maybe others, voted present, at least they said they voted present, because they did not feel like they had the authority to even appoint a new administrator. And I see the position you're taking is, though you disagree that duty is mandatory upon the expiration of a term, but that you think that the commission, in fact, does have the authority to appoint a new administrator right now, and that they were incorrect. Is that accurate?
Well, three answers to that. First of all, factually, Your Honor is absolutely correct that that was the stated reason of the three commissioners. This side comment by Commissioner Thompson about we should have a deal in place, that was not joined by anybody else.
Yeah.
So Mr. Satan was a little confused on the record there. The question of whether they can appoint versus must or cannot is not an issue in this case because it doesn't matter whether they could and decided not to or whether they can't. Either way, they don't have a duty. The only issue in this case is whether they have a duty, and we're going to talk about why they don't. But I think the confusion comes from the discussion in Preen about, well, what can the governor do when there's a holdover and there's no vacancy for him to fill? And obviously the majority and the dissent had different views of 15.07.
It would be pretty hard for us, I think, to decide this question as a matter of statutory interpretation and not at least implicitly answer the question as to whether the commission can right now, with concededly no vacancy and a lawful holdover, appoint a new commissioner. I'm trying to think how you would read the statute and not at least address that point. And I agree there wasn't a lot of debate about that, but there might be. Maybe you could say, if you're correct, there is no mandatory duty to appoint within a specific time frame. But in order to make sense of the statute, can you only appoint if there's a vacancy? Again, as the three Democratic appointees to the commission seem to say, and to some extent, if this case is important for the functioning of the Elections Commission, perhaps it might be useful for us to at least interpret the statute in reference to that too. It seems to be underneath the surface of this case.
Okay, it might be useful in an advisory kind of way, sure, but in terms of necessary to decide the case, I'd push back on that. Okay. In Preen, it was necessary because if the governor didn't have an ability to appoint during a holdover, it brought up the problem the dissent was pointing out, which is, well, how do we ever even get someone that the Senate can look at, right? In this case, all the commission needs to do to create that vacancy that indisputably gives them the power to make an appointment is they remove a commissioner under 1561 1B2, which they can do at any time, including the commissioner's term.
So you're, at this point, not taking a position at all as to whether the first sentence permits them, even absent a vacancy, to appoint a new administrator?
We just don't see it as necessary to reaching a holding in this case. So if I can get back to 1561, because understanding the statute is really helpful here in a kind of deeper level, that statute has the job of telling us who the appointing authority is for each of the commissioners and the administrator. And there's actually 5 different appointing authorities. It's a really interesting statute. Each position's term of office, the removal process for the administrator that I just talked about with Justice Hagedorn, and what to do if there's a vacancy either in a position of the or the administrator. And there are 3 sentences in 1561 that do impose a duty to appoint. But to respond to Justice Bradley's question, they all apply only if there's a vacancy. So you've got the 3rd sentence of 1561, 1B1, which talks about a vacancy in the position of the administrator, and then 2 sentences in 1561-5, which talk about vacancies in the commissioner positions. The provisions are pretty similar, but obviously we're going to focus on that 3rd sentence of 1B1 today. It has all, sorry, Justice Bradley.
I may just kind of tie this up, at least in my mind. I quoted earlier from the reply brief of the defendant appellants here, but was asking about regardless if there's a vacancy. And I know that resonated in my ear because I had read it, and indeed it's on page 23, which you don't need to look at. I will read it to you of the legislature's brief. It says, here, under the plain text, statutory content, and statutory purpose of 1561, WEC must appoint an administrator at the expiration of each 4-year term, regardless of whether a vacancy in that office exists. So it's your position, however, that you need a vacancy. So
correct.
To that extent, you're at odds with whether a vacancy is needed. Let me ask, perhaps a bit rhetorically, are you asking us to overrule Prane?
We are not. There's a lot of pieces of praying this court may want to revisit at some point, but that's not necessary today. We'll talk a little more about that as we go on. But what I want to focus on first is that third sentence of 1B1, because it has all the hallmarks of a statute that does create a duty, and I think it's really helpful to see what that kind of statute looks like. So we start that third sentence out, and it has a clause that creates the condition that triggers the vacancy, if a vacancy occurs. So now I'm on the commission, I'm like, oh, know when this happens, right? Then I get to the second sentence. We've got an active voice sentence that says the commission shall appoint a new administrator. Well, right there, we know it doesn't apply to holdovers because you're not appointing a new administrator if you've got a holdover. Third, it creates a deadline to act, no later than 45 days after the date of the vacancy. And this one even has like the bonus round. The fourth sentence says that it creates a consequence if the commission fails to meet the deadline, turning things over to the Joint Committee on Legislative Organization, who appoints an interim administrator. Now, let's go back to the appellant's sentence that they like. It reads very differently, and it reads differently because it has a different job. And we know that our responsibility is to honor the different choices the legislature makes in drafting. And when they pick different language, especially in the same subsection of a statute, we respect it and give it different meaning. So let's look at that first sentence. Unlike the third sentence, it creates no triggering condition. It creates no deadline to make an appointment. It imposes no consequence for not making an appointment. And its syntactical structure, using the passive voice, that an appointee shall be chosen by the appointing authority, focuses on granting authority to the commission, not some other entity. If you go back to 1561-1A, you see all sorts of different bodies get to appoint. They are not bureaucrats. Two of them are actually appointed by two of the appellants here. But you have four different appointers up in for the commission, and we get down to the administrator, and the legislature said the commission shall choose its own administrator, right? But the focus is on who has that grant of authority. It's like dozens of other provisions in our law. We think there's over 160 provisions like this in our statutes with that same syntax. Appointee shall be selected, shall be appointed by appointing authority.
Counsel, but how long could it go on, quite frankly? I mean, how long could she be a holdover? How long is indefinitely?
This is a question Justice Hagedorn asked during pre-net oral argument. As long as the majority of the commission feels that she is doing a good job, and we'll talk in a minute about what a complex, difficult, full-time job this is, and as long as Administrator Wolf wants to continue carrying out this very intense job. But the important thing, and this is different than preen, is the appointing authority can remove her at any time if they feel that she's not doing a good job. This is not like the result in preen where the appointing authority was just stuck. Now, Mr. Saitlin mentioned that the passive voice just, I think his quote was, focuses the mind. And what passive voice can also do is focus our mind on what matters. And here what matters is who appoints, not imposing a duty on the commission.
Counsel,
and that's what this court concluded.
I know, so I just want to go back to my previous question, because there are parts of your brief that discuss what the first sentence means in reference to preen or preen, and I think it's preen. But you discussed that it has, the preen supports the rule that an appointing authority has the option but not a duty to make a new appointment during a holdover. And so there's a number of arguments here that, again, it's an option, not a duty. And so I thought the dispute between the two sides here was whether the first sentence mandated a new appointment within a particular period of time, or whether it permitted a new appointment after the expiration of a term. But it seems to me that you're maybe backing away from that and saying there may or may not be the option to appoint if there's a vacancy, depending on the vacancy status. And again, I think that's why, to me, this question about whether you can appoint matters for how you read the statute. Does the statute give the commission the authority to appoint when there is no vacancy in subsection 1 or not? I don't know how we don't I get your understanding, your dream scenarios here. We just say the duty's not mandatory. Thank you. I understand that's your preferred argument here, but it feels like we have to read the statute, in some ways. And your arguments, based on Praying in part, seem to suggest that there is an authority to appoint somebody new again, which the three commissioners based their vote on the fact that they did not have any authority to act at all.
Right. And just to be clear, our friends on the other side have never made an argument that if they have an ability to appoint, they must, right? And I heard Your Honor saying, well, it would be good to give guidance to everybody on what the lay of the land is. So here would be the argument that they do have the ability to appoint. It's that the majority in Preen, I'll use Preen, not the dissent, said that 15.07, which is the governor's appointing authority, creates an option for him to appoint during a holdover. That's at Preen at 23, 29, and 53, if it wants. So the analogy would be to say, well, you have that same passive syntax, the person shall be appointed by the commission, so that if 15.07 has that role there, then 1561, the first sentence, does here. There are some differences in the statutes, obviously, including the fact that the governor's appointment statute gives for-cause protection to the person. So the whole sense of what the term of office is different there than it is in 1561, where the administrator never enjoys that for-cause protection. But I want to make sure we get to Pasco, because Pasco is really helpful to the court here, I think.
Before you do that, can I just ask you to respond to an argument that Mr. Zeitlin made, although he didn't make it today in front of us, but he made it numerous times in the briefs, that the sentence in paragraph 18, the governor must nominate and the Senate must confirm members of the DNR board, somehow infers this mandatory obligation.
So that paragraph is not talking about holdovers, Your Honor. It's just talking about the governor's general duty to appoint. If we want to find out what to do about holdovers, we got to go to those more specific paragraphs 23, 29, and 53.
Where it talks about prerogative.
Correct. And in the circuit court, they argued that prerogative means duty, that they must, or that he must. I think they've abandoned that now. Okay, so let's make sure we get to Pasco here, because it again featured one of those common passive voice constructions. All vacancies in the department shall be filled and all new appointments shall be made by the respective chiefs. And the argument there was, hey, that creates a duty to appoint. And this court concluded in a unanimous opinion that the sentence shows that the legislature has merely designated who has authority to fill the vacancies, who has the power. It is not a mandate to the chief, but a grant of power. And the same is true with the first sentence of 1561 1B1. It is a grant of power to the appointing authority, here the commission, and other statutes, other appointing authorities. It is not a duty to appoint. Now, in their reply brief, the appellants tried to distinguish Pasco based on the premise that it did not have a temporal element. And I think the way Mr. Zeitlin described it today is it meant that our statute mentions a term of year. But the question isn't whether a statute talks about time ever. It's whether the statute has a deadline. In paragraph 28 of Pasco, you'll see that the statute says the statute did not require the chief to fill these positions at any certain time. Today, Mr. Zeitlin conceded that if the statute they're relying on does not require the commission to fill these positions on any particular deadline, and that's fatal. If there's no deadline, there's no duty. When the legislature wants to create a deadline, it's easy. You create deadline language. You require action within a certain time or no later than a certain number of days. That's exactly what they chose in the third sentence of 1B1, where they said not later than 45 days. And we all know that not every mention of time in a statute is a deadline, that time has many, many rules in our law. And telling appointing authorities and potential appointees what the term of office will be is a separate reason to discuss time. It doesn't have a secret embedded deadline within it.
Ms. Attorney Gibson, you seem to have a very well thought out outline, and I don't want you to have to stray too far from it, but I want to make sure you get to remedy at some point. So is that on your deadline? Because I am concerned with the remedy that you're requesting.
Sure. So I'm sure the court has reviewed the record thoroughly and sees the kind of struggles we had in the circuit court. The the concessions they made in their litigation filings, but then the public comments they made in public. So we did seek injunctive relief there to make sure that those concessions, had some weight, and that the Senate didn't try to do what it had done in September of 23. We are confident that when this court rules that Administrator Wolf is validly holding over and that the commission has no duty to appoint during that holdover, that the appellants will respect that. So we are not seeking to continue the permanent injunction in
Just
this
a
case.
declaratory judgment?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
And mandamus, you're seeking.
Right. I mean, we're so far from mandamus, and I don't even hear Mr. Saitlin really trying to defend a mandamus statement. He's saying there's no specifics on when this duty even happens or how. We can't be in mandamus land, which requires a clear and plain duty.
Counsel, what work, if any, does the 4-year term language in the statute do? Because it seems to me that there is absolutely no difference between an administrator during her 4-year term or as a holdover. So doesn't your construction of the statute just read the 4-year term language completely out of the statute?
No, that's incorrect, Your Honor. First of all, the term of office is different, has different roles in different statutes. So if we go back to the statute at issue in Prane, everybody on the court then agreed that during those 4 years after his Senate confirmation, he had for-cause protection. So that the term of office had that role for him. Here in 1561, it never has that role because the administrator is always an at-will employee. So we have to look for other purposes for the term of office before we ever start talking about holdovers. And what that role is, as I may have mentioned before, is to provide both the appointing authority and the potential appointees a sense of what kind of job is this? And if we look at all these dozens of statutes with different terms, we see ones with really short terms and ones with long terms. Commissioners serve for 5 years, for example. And so longer terms come with a set of higher expectations about the goals we might set, the goals we might meet, and then the importance of continuity and stability in the position.
But if she's at will, it doesn't matter if she's serving her 4-year term or she's a holdover.
No, it does not. But again, embedded in Your Honor's question is this idea that it's really like it must be an opportunity to reappoint or it must be an opportunity to fire.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just asking you, what role does it play? Because you could erase it from the statute and your construction of the statute effectively erases it. There's no point in specifying a term for her because the commission could remove her at any point in time. She's an at-will employee. So my question again is, what role does the 4-year term language serve? I don't think it serves any.
Well, I disagree with Your Honor, and I see
Okay.
I'm not selling you on what we think is an important term. Maybe a helpful analogy is, often private contracts between independent contractors and companies will say, this is a 3-year contract, even though it's terminable at will by either side, right?
But the 3-year contract if somebody hires a contractor, they have a contract. So if they try to terminate that, they have to have a reason. But here the commission does not.
No, that's not true, Your Honor.
Well,
Lots of those
it
contracts.
is actually true,
No.
counsel, in a commercial context that you're invoking, which is not the same situation.
Well,
here.
we're outside the record now, but my personal experience is that you can have a term of a contract that remains terminable at will. And it is really important for people to understand what the initial term is, because we need to know, am I only going to be in town for 6 months? So I'd like to help out at the Wisconsin Elections Commission, but I really don't have that length of time to commit, right?
Why isn't the answer to your...
Sorry, Justice.
I just want
I'm not getting an answer. Go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe this will answer it. Why isn't the answer to Justice Rebecca Bradley's question, look at Prane? I mean, isn't that when Justice Dallett in her dissent in Prane talked about the conclusion being bizarre and absurd, and I think there might have been one other adjective that's not coming. Yeah, I'm sure there was. maybe even an adverb for one of those adjectives. Absurdly bizarre. But when she wrote that in Prane, she's talking about this, right? Like in Prane, there was a 6-year staggered term. And we said, don't worry about it. So why isn't the answer to your question to Justice Bradley today, it's in Prane? I mean, Prane did away with that. It did away with what the end of a term means. That's what makes praying so absurdly bizarre, right?
Well, I agree. I think that Mr. Saitlin's side has said, well, it was meaningless under praying, except that for the first time the governor has an opportunity to appoint if he wishes. But it doesn't have that role in this statute because the commission can always remove an administrator and pick someone new. And that's why we think it's a very crabbed reading of term of office to just see it as, how soon can we fire you? I want to make sure we talk briefly about appellant separation of powers argument. I think everyone's probably on the same page on this, but unlike the U.S. Constitution, our Wisconsin Constitution has no constitutional role for the Senate to advise and consent. What they have is a statutory power, so if we comply with the statute, that's the end of the story. And I'd like to add, this would not be a great case to, for the first time, recognize such an implied constitutional power for the Senate, because this isn't like praying where you had the governor, that the Senate majority was just stuck with this guy who's appointing people maybe they don't like. They have a robust, significant role in picking who the appointing authority is to begin with. As I said, two of the appellants in this case picked two of the commissioners themselves, one of whom is actually a holdover. And then two more of the people are chosen by the governor, but from a 3-person list given to them by legislative leadership, and then those two people go through advice and consent themselves.
Your opposing counsel has said he's not making a separate constitutional argument, that his argument is based upon the statute. So it seems to me that we're all in agreement, between the two of you at least, that the question before us is a statutory one.
Right. Great. It's great to have everyone on the same page.
We always are.
So I also wanted to address Mr. Saitlin's point about a tie. And it is true that in some cases, the commissioners could sometimes disagree about the quality of an administrator's performance, and that means there wouldn't be a majority at that moment under 1B2. And we think that's a feature that the legislature wanted to build in here. They chose to have an even number of commissioners, not an odd number like this body, and that the commissioners reflect a variety of different viewpoints, even beyond the Democratic-Republican thing, right? 2 of the commissioners must be former clerks. And so that means, and I know there are people in this room who get frustrated with them for tying for other reasons, but that reflects a preference in close cases for stability and consistency over acting potentially precipitously or in response to shifting political pressures. This role is not a part-time policy-making position like the NR board people. This is an intense, full-time job requiring expertise and experience. And it just doesn't work if there are frequent changes in personnel and sudden vacancies. And Administrator Wolf's responsibilities are detailed in the record at R6, and it's quite an overwhelming list. I'd urge you not to apply. But just, I thought it'd be helpful to get a flavor of some of the things she does. Implement the directives of the commission regarding elections administration, administering personnel and HR functions, preparing the standard ballot forms that all the clerks have to use, managing election recounts, administering recall elections, preparing guidance and advisory opinions that the commission wants to issue, providing trainings for clerks and other election officials, creating voter information and education programs, and leading the agency's review and approval of electronic voting equipment, which you have to do before every election. That's just a sampling of the responsibilities, but if an administrator is underperforming, the commission's right there on the ground with her. They're going to see that, and regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they're going to coalesce and bring in an administrator who can do the job. So if there are no further questions from the court, we ask this court to affirm the circuit court's holding below, that Administrator Wolf is validly holding over, and that the commission has no duty to appoint during that holdover. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Just a couple of brief points, Your Honor. I think the most telling portion of that presentation was my friend's answer to Justice Protasiewicz of how long can this go on. The answer was, I think I heard, forever. we have a situation where the position that they're putting forward is that 3 members of a commission can forever keep away from the people's voice.
You asked
Who
us
will
to
be the
overrule
chief-
Prane. Would that still be the case?
No, Your Honor. In Prane, you have a traditional deadlock between the governor and the legislature, which are both elected by the people. The way that is resolved is the way that Prane resolves it. What we have here...
It's not answering my question.
Yes?
What I hear you say is what you said on page 35 of your brief. And you said, this creates an absurd separation of powers This creates the absurd separation of powers violating results discussed above, where the administrator will retain power indefinitely and with the support of exclusively one political party. And my question to you is, if you are sincerely worried about this, then why not ask us to overrule Prane?
I mean, you've read the dissent, right? It's convincing.
No, it's not.
Your Honor, I would submit that there's a very significant difference when you have the governor, who's elected by the people to be the chief executive, deadlocked with the Senate, which is elected by the people to do advice and consent, versus a situation where you have 3, with respect, bureaucrats holding the state's chief election officer's appointment away from all the people.
But that wasn't the basis of Prane. It wasn't based on who made the appointments and that it was a deadlock between the governor and the legislature. Where do you see any of that language? That's not even in the dissent.
I mean, I wasn't involved in Prane, but as I read the Prane decision, there was a prior decision of this court, Thompson, and the majority, an old case, the majority went with Thompson. The dissent wanted to overrule Thompson. Stare decisis is an important consideration. None of that is at issue here. We have a statute that has certain language, has mandatory language. And we have the Council for WEC saying that this absurd position can go on forever. There's no precedent that requires this court to reach that absolutely absurd result. They cite PASCO. The PASCO didn't have any sort of term of years in there. If you read the statute of PASCO, it's obviously just telling the Milwaukee folks who appoints. Here, you have a 4-year term, and it says shall. By far the most reasonable reading of that is that once that 4-year term expires, these folks on WEC have to make the appointment so that the people, look, there's a lot of arguments here. We've got to take a step back. This is the state's chief election officer. They are telling this court that who the state's chief election officer will be forever away from the people. That is not a sustainable result in a democracy.
Counsel,
Go ahead.
If you're, suppose the commission had appointed a new administrator that was rejected by the Senate. In your read of the statute, would it require the commission to act again?
I think that's right, Your Honor. The second section of the provision we're talking about, second sentence, says that once the nomination has been sent over, then WEC appoints an interim administrator during the period of the Senate's consideration. If Administrator Wolf or somebody else was sent over and the nomination was rejected, that interim administrator presumably would stay on as a holdover until WEC did its duty to send over another name, and eventually there would be an agreement, because it's so important to have a chief election officer. The problem with the Sorry, Your Honor.
I just want to follow up with one question your opposing counsel made, and I'd like to hear you respond to it. That your argument is that they need to do it within a reasonable time. You don't argue that there's a specific deadline for it. And our argument is under mandamus that puts us kind of outside of mandamus because it's not a sufficiently certain piece. Would you respond to that argument, please?
Your Honors, mandamus is an equitable remedy. The closest case we found on point to a situation like this is the Hanasuba case out of Hawaii. The Hawaii Supreme Court ordered the mandamus, and they said, you got a reasonable time to do this. That's the way mandamus generally works. You got to give the officials a reasonable time. You can't appoint them back in July. You got to do it now. Whatever that reasonable time period is, it's been 1.5 years. And look, Your Honors, if you think that we haven't satisfied the standards for mandamus, issue a ruling saying that we're right on the meaning of the statute. Presumably, the kind of, frankly, nonsense that's been going on with WEC, where they're saying we're not going to send anyone over unless you pre-commit to approving it would end if there was that kind of decision. Otherwise, we'd spend a year and a half. It's been a year and a half since the people have a statutory right to speak who will be their chief election officer. If this case comes out the way that the circuit court ruled, it will be indefinitely. And that is just not a sustainable way to govern a democracy.
Thank you. All right, the court is adjourned. Oral argument. The students that are here, we hope to see you again about noon. And other than that, go about and enjoy your day.
You have been watching a production of Wisconsin Eye, your unfiltered window into legislative deliberations and public policy programming, where our mission is to provide Wisconsinites an opportunity to access the legislative process and connect with conversations that inform our citizenry. Please consider supporting our mission, and thank you for watching. Wisconsin Eye, policy made public.
you guys gonna ask questions as to why they renamed everything? And are you prepared to answer those questions if they ask? Okay, because I'm looking at the new names and I'm going to myself, all right, what changed?
Yeah.
Other than the word we added, extreme.
Thank you.
Are you ready to talk about El Nino?
Ready to look at
It's gonna be. You guys gonna ask questions about that?
Yeah, if you tell me all your questions ahead of time, that'd be great.
Well, it's just, in the end, there, you know, the prediction of extreme weather is like 50-50.
Yeah, I
And
got
if you look
both
at the
this morning.
Farmer's Almanac,
Yeah.
whatever.
It's not gonna be last year. That much they feel very confident in.
Hey, when do we do national flooding? Did we do an awareness for flooding? I can't remember.
It's usually in the spring.
Like when in the spring?
April-ish.
Daniel, you've increased your. Hold on, are we
Steadily
live
grows.
with anybody right now?
Are we what?
Is anybody live right
I
now?
am.
Okay.
Yep. Well, I'm feeding, they're not up yet. They have it in the studio.
I've learned.
Is the
mic hot?
And I'm, as we kind of begin, Daniel and I will be up here for questions afterwards. Are we ready? Good. Oh, hold on. We do have another arrival. Hello.
Hello, hello.
Should get my good side.
There was a restaurant called Hello's on the Fox. And every time someone would come in, they go, "Hello, let us help entertain you."
What was that?
Back in 1990,
Oh,
the late 90s.
so we typed.
Anybody Bears fans? Bear fan?
My dad is super sad. I'm a Packer fan, so.
Be a fun Thanksgiving.
Right?
Yeah. I would come Thanksgiving, so.
That's cool.
That's got to be the. I saw some of the reels or whatever they call it, the social influencers, and how they're just like so excited this is finally their chance to beat the Packers and break this 10-game streak. And then they're just losing their stuff after that blocked field goal. Makes for an interesting conversation the next day. Anybody watch the Tyson fight?
Just so you know.
I don't think anybody watched it. I don't think anybody technically watched the fight.
You mean that?
That was the worst.
That was, and of course, we thought it was because we were up north and we were doing it off of our phone to the TV through Roku. So we just thought it was up north connectivity, but it wasn't, apparently. Are we ready? We're good? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for being here at our Brown County Emergency Management location. We are here today to talk about our annual preparedness discussion about the importance for families, loved ones, individuals traveling to and from Brown County, or if you're going off and visiting individuals, or if your kids are coming back from college like mine. You want to have this conversation about what can you have prepared in your car in case of those extreme weather events that take place. And the last thing you want is to be left stranded. And so annually, as a reminder to our residents in the Northeast Wisconsin region, Mr. Kane, who is our Director of Emergency Management, one of his jobs as part of the grants that we receive as a county is to put together materials and information as to how we can be best prepared. So today, Daniel's going to go through all kinds of different ideas that one could have in their vehicle when they're traveling. And obviously, these items change depending on where you're driving to and what times of the day you're going to be driving, because as we all know, with the connected world that we have, and Brown County being fairly urban, the chances of being able to get a hold of someone, depending on that time and that day, it's stronger. But of course, if you're driving in the rural parts of Brown County or rural parts of the state, you really want to take note of some of these things that we have. In the end, to have these bins in your back of your car really doesn't take a lot, and it could save lives. And that's really what today's about. It's talking about how do we save lives? How can we be prepared? And ultimately, for that one incident that takes place, hopefully never, but in the event that it does, what can we do to really truly save a life? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Keen, who's going to talk more about the actual items that one could consider to have in there. One item that recently our Public Works Department, our highway shop, brought down to us is in reminding us that if you're walking or if your car's broke down, to make sure you have something like this, because it does stand out, it does reflect, and ultimately it allows cars who are going by to see you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. King. Daniel?
Thank you. So this week is being recognized throughout the state and locally as severe weather, winter weather awareness week for several reasons that affect us in many areas of government and the ongoing effort to keep the citizens safe. So I just want to thank Executive Streckenbach for the support and the continued commitment to this awareness effort by supporting the ideas around preparedness. Winter weather needs no introduction in this part of the country, as Brown County averages 3 winter-related emergencies every year. However, the purpose of this week is to encourage the public to become a little bit more resilient to these every single year. There are real impacts from these events, As last year, statewide, there were 9 deaths and over 2,200 injuries related to winter weather-related traffic incidents, and 45 deaths, 861 emergency room visits, 225 hospitalizations due to extreme cold. So these are real threats and real things we want to take seriously and have real impacts, and there are ways that we can certainly try to help mitigate those impacts in our daily lives, and that's what we're going to try to talk about today. The National Weather Service long-range forecasting models do kind of show that there's a strong likelihood this year of more than average snowfall. It's going to be a heavier snowfall more than likely this year, and there is no real signal one way or the other in terms of extreme cold, but it certainly appears that it will be much colder than last year. Last year, precipitation amounts were down, and the actual extreme cold indicators were also not as strong. Now we are in a period where that seems to be changing. So expect more cold this year and certainly more snow. So there's a few things we can do to combat this. Number first is know the difference between a watch and a warning. You want to start with awareness, right? Be aware of what your hazards are. Be aware of what the terminology is. A watch simply means that conditions are present for these threats to impact you. A warning means that they're actively going on. So when we see things like blizzards, extreme cold, snow squalls are fairly new in terms of terminology. Ice storms, that type of a thing. Understand the difference between what a watch and a warning is telling you. In that same area, the National Weather Service this year did change the terminology in some of these categories to simplify the weather alerts. They worked with several teams to decide on how to simplify all the different types of alerts that they send out. So now instead of seeing wind chill watches, warnings, or advisories, you'll now see extreme cold watches, extreme cold warnings, and cold weather advisories. And the metric for an extreme cold warning is moved from minus 35 degrees to minus 30 degrees. So that's going to be a change this year. So if you reach a minus 30, there will be an extreme cold warning issued for our area. Heed travel warnings and check road conditions before traveling. This is a very easy thing to do. 511 has a great website that will give you this information on what the latest road conditions are. Why this is important is there might be tow bans in effect for certain areas depending on road conditions and the weather. Tow ban simply means that tow trucks will not come out in that weather. It's not safe for them to safely remove your vehicle, so you might be left on the side of the road until it is safe to extricate you from whatever situation you're in. So understand that might be an issue, you might be on your own for a while, and that's what we're going to talk about here. If you have to travel during bad weather, let someone know where you're going, what route you're going to take, and what time to expect you. This is just important from the sense of if you do get off the road or something like that, somebody knows that they should be expecting a phone call from you, and they would know which route you took. So if responders want to know where you might be, they can at least follow that route to find you. We encourage the use of multiple weather apps and alerts to get multiple alerts sent to you so that you are never caught off guard by severe weather. Again, there are several weather apps, TV and radio. Weather radios are a really good source of information, especially when the power's out, and social media. The kits I'll talk about here, this one here is specific to our vehicle. So we talked about vehicle weather preparedness. We want to have things such as blankets, shovels, tow rope, jumper cables. This vest is a really great tool if you do need to leave your vehicle. Cell phone charger, flashlight, and then extra warm gear, coats, mittens, hats, boots, that type of a thing. If you don't have to leave your vehicle, it's safer to not do so. But if you have to leave your vehicle, make sure that you have your vest. There are some road flares here that can alert oncoming traffic that you are stranded. And extra blankets, warm weather gear, that type of thing will keep you warm during the time that you are stranded. This here is cat litter. We often get questions about this. This is simply for traction. If you find yourself in a situation where you're able to get out but you just need some traction, this will provide great traction for you. Or sand is another option for that. On the home care side, this is home emergency preparedness. Some of these things are convenient. Some of them are safety related. But as you can see, we've got first aid kits, wireless chargers, extra food and water, batteries, flashlights, weather radio, tools to turn off your utilities for gas and water, and then some Some other things will be our personal care items. Again, some plates and that type of thing. Activities for kids, really important if we have long-term power outage. We want to make sure that we keep them entertained. Think about, obviously, pets, elderly, infants, and those with access to functional needs. Are there any special things that we'd want to have in kits for those people as well? And then you also want to make sure you plan ahead. Again, we talked about having utilities for shutting off your gas and water in case there is a release in one of your pipes. Make sure you have fresh batteries in your smoke and CO2 alarms. Make sure those are updated. Replace your smoke alarms every 10 years. Replace the CO2 alarms every 6 years. If possible, please have your furnace inspected. It's a good idea. And always keep your gas tank at half full or above to prevent it from freezing or running out during your trip. During winter weather events, we often experience long-term power outages, so it's very important to try to pre-identify early on alternate sources of power for if you're going to experience that. If you're going to use a generator, make sure that you use it outdoors, never inside, for the fear of CO2 poisoning. Some municipalities locally might offer charging stations at their local municipality during power outages. Encourage you to check with your local municipality on if that's an option during those times. And if you are reliant on medical devices that are reliant on power, check with your provider of those devices on a power plan, a backup power plan, to make sure that if you have things like oxygen or machines that require electricity to function, that you have a plan to keep those things operational during power outages. And taking these small steps can go a long way to ensuring your health and safety this winter for whatever winter throws your way. And I would encourage to follow our Facebook page, Brown County Emergency Management Facebook page, throughout the week for other tips that we share. With that, I'll take any questions.
Could you talk about, if we lose power, what are some safe ways we can stay warm and ensure things don't get worse?
Yeah, so again, this kit is probably your go-to here. Again, we've got a blanket symbolizing, a lot of these are symbolizations, so understand that every kit is going to be a little bit different, right? You base it on what you have the ability to afford and what things you think are important, but certainly warm winter, for winter weather awareness, blankets, extra clothing, protective clothing, that type of thing is important just to keep stashed away. And so that way, if you do lose heat for an extended period of time, we encourage your kits to be at home, self-sufficient for 72 hours. That's kind of the general guidelines. So food, water, extra clothing, that type of thing, have that stuff available for 72 hours to feel pretty good.
I had a question about the tow bans. So you said that would be announced, or will you let someone know when they call in, hey, there's a tow ban, you could be stuck there for a certain number of hours, and then would they know how many hours they're going to be stuck there potentially? And then also, are they going to get tickets for being stranded on the side of the road?
I don't know about the ticketing part of it. I don't know that that's necessarily part of it. The tow ban is really in effect to prevent folks from A, not driving, and B, to protect the life, most importantly, to protect the life and safety of the responders and the tow truck companies that are out there doing the work. Once that clears, they'll come out and get you. It's dependent on the nature of whatever the storm is providing. I believe they would tell you. You could certainly ask the 911 dispatcher when you call if there is a tow ban in effect, or if there's a duration on that, they'd be able to point you in more direction in the time.
What if someone finds themselves stuck and they are not prepared and don't have a kit?
If they don't have a kit and they're not prepared, I would encourage them to do that ahead of time, right? Obviously, but if they're not, then you're left. You have to be able to be flexible, right, with what you have, right, and rely on your sources. That's why I think even if you don't have the ability to have a kit, maybe having a plan ahead of time. Again, making sure you're making contacts with relatives or friends that know where you're going, that can provide that help for you, so that you're not alone in this. So even if it's not a full-fledged kit, just having a plan ahead of time, being aware of the hazards. If I can avoid traveling that day, I'm going to not put myself in that situation to begin with. If I find myself in that situation, having somebody to rely on in case I do, even if I don't have a full kit, I would encourage them to do that.
if do you suggest that people leave their vehicle on unless that exhaust is covered? Obviously, that would be dangerous, and then that smoke would be going back in their car. But you're telling people leave it on for as long as it'll run?
Yeah, the biggest issue we have with that is, the exhaust being covered up. If you find yourself in a situation where your vehicle exhaust is being covered by the snow or by the impact of the crash, don't leave the vehicle on because of that threat of the CO2 getting back inside the vehicle. But if you have the gas and you have the ability to stay warm that way and keep your things charged, we'd encourage that. I've seen some sources will tell you turn it on every 10 minutes or so to kind of conserve energy and conserve gas. So that's an option depending on, again, your gas levels and your battery levels and your devices. But that's an option if you're low on those types of things. Maybe every 10, 15 minutes, turn it back on to preserve that energy.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the interest. That concludes this awareness opportunity for us to speak to the residents of Brown County, Northeast Wisconsin. Obviously, Daniel and myself are available for one-on-ones if needed. Other than that, have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.